चुनिंदा कविताओं का एक संग्रह हंगरी में प्रकाशित हुआ है। आप लंदन स्कूल ऑफ इकोनॉमिक्स में ग्लोबल सिविल सोसाइटी के मुख्य संपादकों में से एक हैं और भारतीय भाषाओं से कालजयी उपन्यासों के अनुवाद को बढ़ावा देने के लिए इंडियन नॉवेल्स कलेक्टिव के सह संपादक हैं। वर्तमान में आप टाटा इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ सोशल साइंसेज मुंबई के स्कूल ऑफ डेवलपमेंट स्टडीज में प्रोफेसर और डीन हैं। आपका इस मंच पर बहुत बहुत स्वागत है। इस अविस्मरणीय और गरिमामय मंच का स्वागत करने के लिए हम साहित्य अकादमी के अध्यक्ष माननीय श्री माधवराव जी से अनुरोध करते हैं कि हमारे पूर्व चीफ जस्टिस जी का स्वागत करें। शॉल उठा करके, ये गमछा दे करके, और हम सभी तालियों के साथ इसमें शामिल हो जाएं। हमारे बीच एपी माहेश्वरी जी का हमारे अकादमी के सचिव श्री श्रीनिवास राव जी माहेश्वरी जी का स्वागत कर रहे हैं। अश्विनी कुमार जी का स्वागत। और मुकुल जी का स्वागत भी। कभी कभी ऐसा होता है कि मन नहीं भरता और लगता है कि ये स्वागत की परंपरा अभी और भी आगे जानी चाहिए। तो मैं अकादमी के सचिव आदरणीय श्रीनिवास राव जी से अनुरोध करूंगी कि वे इस भव्य मंच का स्वागत संबोधन करें। आदरणीय श्रीनिवास राव जी।
Thank you, Alkaji. Good afternoon, Namaskar. Respected Justice Sri Dipak Misra ji, former Chief Justice of India, and an eminent scholar. Dr. A.P. Maheshwari ji, eminent author, scholar, and former police officer. Sri Mukul Kumar ji, eminent novelist, poet, and civil servant. Professor Ashwini Kumar ji, eminent poet and scholar. He's already told you that Professor Thangapandian, she has a question for which she has to be present. That was the order at the parliament that just she called. As soon as that her answer is over, she will come and she will join. It is a very important question with related to some Tamilians. So she has to be there. That is what she called me just now. I'm glad to welcome all of you for this session, Literature and Social Justice. Friends, the role of literature in society, especially social movements, is not talked about sufficiently enough. This role of literature in enhancing awareness of other cultures and traditions, its power to unite people and create the atmosphere, social cohesion, amity, peace, and love, can be easily traced in the annals of history of literature in any language of the country. Literature is of many kinds. There's novels, poems, religious literature, economic literature, philosophical literature, scientific literature, etc. And all these literatures have helped mankind to progress materially, to introspect and improve psychologically, and to make the world a better and just place. Literary creations of the medieval Bhakti movements empowered people, united masses, breaking many social barriers by providing them a common purpose or goal of reaching divine, enabled the people who, due to several social conditions and factors, lost touch with the core of their own culture to retrace their cultural roots. Bhakti or devotional literature of India in all the languages, from the saint poets of Tamil Nadu to Karnataka to Maharashtra to Odisha to West Bengal to Assam to Uttar Pradesh to Rajasthan to Punjab, and almost all the regions of India created this magic. While medieval Bhakti literature went a long way in bringing equality of the people in the path of devotion, taking out of equation the elements of class and caste in front of God, and the pursuit of spiritual excellence, modern literary creations empowered downtrodden to counter hegemony of all kinds. Literature allows individuals, especially from marginalized communities, to share their stories. This is particularly empowering for people whose voices have been historically silenced. Writers from oppressed groups, whether based on race, gender, class, sexual orientation, or disability, often use literature to assert their existence, resist stereotypes, and express their own narratives. Stories and poems highlighting several social atrocities and disparity in the social structures and institutions went a long way in the post-independence India to speed up social equality and ensuring social justice gets priority. Literature is not merely a reflection of society, but often a catalyst for social change. It enables people to question the status quo, reflect on their own roles in perpetuating or challenging injustice, and offers narratives that can heal, educate, and inspire. Social justice and progress have one important ingredient: critical thinking, and modern and contemporary Indian literary creations in all the languages enabled people to develop critical thinking. Another component of this is knowledge. Literature brings knowledge about other cultures and traditions, and that in turn enhance one's awareness and acceptance level of other ways of thinking. When one accepts there are other ways of thinking, one's horizon widens exponentially. This is the most fundamental step in the acquisition of knowledge. So this is the new subject and new topic that we have inducted in this festival first time. So in every festival we induct two or three new topics. So other than Justice Dipak Misra ji, who can justify this particular topic, we thought, and when we invited him, he so kindly agreed in spite of his hectic, busy schedule. I know. Thank you, sir. Thanks for coming. 2 years ago, he gave a wonderful annual lecture. That time also he spoke many things about Mahabharata and many other things. So this time also we are expecting much more than what he has already spoken. And we have a wonderful panelist with us. Thank you all. Now I hand over the mic to Justice Shaji. Or we can invite one by one. Yeah. Okay. I think, yeah, you can invite one by one. You can invite. Yeah. Huh? Yeah. So let us start with Dr. A.P. Maheshwari ji because he's a writer and also police officer. So let us see what kind of social justice and literature he will justify before this August audience. Sir.
मैं आप सभी का हार्दिक अभिनंदन करता हूं। मंचासीन सभी सुधीजनों को प्रणाम करता हूं और साहित्य अकादमी का आभारी हूं कि मुझे अवसर प्रदान किया। मैं कबीर के उस दोहे से शुरुआत करना चाहूंगा कि जात न पूछो साधु की, पूछ लीजिए ज्ञान, और मोल करो तलवार का, पड़ी रहने दो म्यान। ये बिल्कुल जीवन का सार है। कोई भी व्यक्ति मिलता है वो उतना ही सज्जन है, उसमें वही देवीय शक्ति है। यहाँ से हम अपनी अवधारणा को शुरू करते हैं और साहित्य वो चीज है जो सबका हित करती है, वही साहित्य है। और वही आदमी सधा हुआ है जो कि उसी विचार से अपनी बात को, जिंदगी के यथार्थ को अंकित करे, हमारे सामने लेकर के आए। और कबीरदास जी के आगे अगर चले तो दूसरा एक दोहा जिसने मुझे प्रभावित किया कि नहीं दरिद्र को दुखी न दीना, नहीं दरिद्र को दुखी न दीना, और नहीं को कोई अभुत न लक्षण हीना। इस प्रमाइस से अगर हम शुरू करते हैं तो हम देखेंगे कि हमारे समाज में जितना ज्ञान, और हम वासुदेव कुटुंबकम की बात करते हैं, फिर ये अचानक महसूस होता है कि फिर जितना ये विघटन हुआ और जितनी हम देखते हैं स्थितियां उत्पन्न कैसे हुई। हमारा जो मूल मंत्र है वासुदेव कुटुंबकम का, हमारा जो मूल मंत्र है जिसमें कि हमारे सभी पूर्वजों ने, जो दोहे मैंने पढ़े, ऐसी कल्पना की है, फिर भी कई विकृतियां इसमें आ गई और उन विकृतियों को हटाने के लिए फिर कई और संत आए, जिसमें रैदास का नाम सुनते हैं, हम मीरा का नाम सुनते हैं, ये बुद्ध का देश है। फिर रविंद्रनाथ टैगोर आए, कई ऐसे लेखक आए इन्होंने धीरे धीरे, मुल्क राज आनंद आए, उन्होंने अपनी बात रखी, निराला ने अपनी बात रखी, पर अब अगणित। और अगर आप विश्व पटल पे जाएंगे तो विश्व पटल पे भी आपको टॉल्स्टॉय की बात, शेक्सपियर, कई लोगों ने समाज की परिस्थितियों को सामने रखा और उसमें सुधार की बात की। अब प्रश्न ये उठता है कि अच्छा साहित्य है क्या? और उस पे एक व्यक्ति ने कहा कि ऐसा साहित्य जो 100 साल तक पढ़ा जाए, तो उसमें कोई संदेह नहीं रहना चाहिए कि वो एक अच्छा साहित्य है। और अगर हम जब उसकी बात करते हैं तो हमारे जो आधारभूत स्तंभ शास्त्र हैं, रामायण है, महाभारत है, वहां से अगर लेकर के हम जहां भी आगे आए तो जगह जगह हमको कई तरह की बातें देखने को मिलेंगी जो कि हमारे सोच को विवश करती हैं कि हम जा कहाँ रहे हैं। एज ए पुलिस ऑफिसर जब हम साहित्य को पढ़ते हैं, सोचते हैं, चाहे हम मुल्क राज आनंद की बात करें, अनटचेबिलिटी की बात उन्होंने की, फिर अनटचेबिलिटी अबॉलिशन एक्ट आया, तो वो साहित्य क्या है कि हमारी भावनाओं को टच करता है। फिर एक आदमी उस पर सोचना शुरू करता है, फिर समूह उस पर विचार करते हैं, फिर एक विद्रोह की स्थिति उत्पन्न होती है और फिर समाज में परिवर्तन आना शुरू होता है। तो साहित्य में वो शक्ति है कि वो हमारी सोच को, हमारे मनोभाव को, हमारी अवधारणाओं को और फिर हमारी आस्था को प्रभावित करता है। और ये कई लोगों ने किया। और धीरे धीरे अगर आप रविंद्रनाथ टैगोर की बात करें तो रविंद्रनाथ टैगोर ने लिखा कि विधवा की आंखों में आंसू नहीं होते। गीतांजलि में उन्होंने लिखा, हिंदी में मैं आपको बोल रहा हूँ, कि विधवा की आंखों में आंसू नहीं होते, लेकिन उसके दिल में एक अनंत आकाश होता है जिसमें कई सपने और आशाएं बसती हैं। एज ए पुलिस ऑफिसर या एज ए कॉमन सिटीजन आप जब मथुरा में जाएंगे तो कई ऐसी विधवाएं मिलेंगी, उनके बच्चे मिलेंगे, जब उनसे बात करेंगे तो आपको लगता है कि हम किस समाज में रह रहे हैं, वहां से कहानियां निकलती हैं। और जब वो कहानियां आपको हिट करती हैं तो वो आपको सोचने को मजबूर कर देती है और वहां से फिर सामाजिक परिवर्तन शुरू होता है। प्रेमचंद ने कई कहानियां लिखी, पूस की रात, या हम बात करें गोदान की या सवा से गुड़ की। निराला जी ने लिखा, सर्वहारा की सेवा में जीवन अर्पित करना ही साधना है। फिर आगे वो लिखते गए, उसी में उन्हें कहा कि वैश्या की आंखों में आंसू नहीं होते, लेकिन उसके दिल में एक अनंत दर्द होता है। अब कहानी कैसे निकलती है और कैसे प्रभावित करती है। मैं बांदा में पुलिस अधीक्षक था, तो एक रेड हुई, इसमें कई महिलाएं पकड़ी गई। एज ए पुलिस ऑफिसर मैंने उसको इंट्रोगेट करना शुरू किया कि तुम ये काम क्यों करती हो। तो उन्होंने कहा साहब आप छोड़िए इस बात को, आप अपना काम करिए, आपको हमें बंद करना है, केस करना, आप बंद करिए। मैं कहा नहीं, मैं जानना चाहता हूँ। फिर मैंने उससे बात की, उसके वर्ड्स जो एग्जैक्ट है वो मैं आपको सुना रहा हूँ। सर आपको क्या लगता है, क्या किसी औरत को ये पसंद होगा कि कोई नया मर्द, रोज एक नया मर्द उसके ऊपर चढ़े? बोले किसी औरत को पसंद नहीं है, लेकिन मजबूरी में करती है। क्यों? कि मेरा हस्बैंड जो है उसके पास भी काम नहीं है, मेरे पास भी काम नहीं है, और मेरा हस्बैंड भी वही मेरे साथ करता है जो ट्रक वाला करता है, लेकिन ये जो ट्रक वाला है मुझे 50 रुपए दे जाता है ताकि मेरे बच्चे भूखे ना सोए। ये उसका जवाब था। ये पाठा क्षेत्र की तक की बात कर रहा हूँ, 1951 की। तो वहां से एक कहानी निकली। और जब मैं लखनऊ में रहता था, शिवानी जी से मैं इसको कह रहा था, तो शिवानी जी ने मुझे गाइड किया कि नहीं महेश्वरी जी आप लिखना शुरू करिए, आपके अनुभव हैं, आप इसको लिखना शुरू करिए। उसको लिखना शुरू किया, फिर ये चीज कई जगह पहुंची, तब फिर विकास की बात होती है, तब फिर कई चीजें। निकलनी शुरू होती है, क्योंकि हम उस चीज को जगह जगह कहानी के तौर पर ले जाते हैं, आगे उसको ले जाते बताते हैं। तो ये तो वो बात हुई कि बिल्कुल असमर्थ लोग। बिजनौर में एक दूसरा केस मेरे सामने आया जो कि मुझको भावुक कर गया बिल्कुल। मेरी नियुक्ति हुई थी, उसके पहले एक महिला को जलाने का प्रयास किया गया, किसी तरह से वो बच गई, किसी तरह से बच गई। लेकिन उसका जो हस्बैंड था जिसने कोशिश की थी, वो किसी बहुत ही सशक्त राजनीतिक स्तर पर जुड़े हुए थे, तो पुलिस दाएं बाएं कर रही। मेरे पास वो आई, 2-3 दफा आई, हर बार मैंने फोन किया, उसको बताता गया, लेकिन नीचे से कोई कार्रवाई हुई नहीं। तो एक दिन मुझे अच्छे से ध्यान है, सुबह के 11 बजे थे, वो मेरी आंखों में आंखें डाल के बोलती कि सर मैं 4 दफे आ गई हूँ, अब आप भी क्या करेंगे, आप हर बार फोन करते हैं, काम नहीं होता है। उसने कहा सर एक प्रश्न का आप बस मुझे जवाब दे दीजिए। फिर मैंने उसको कन्विंस करने की कोशिश की कि तुम आई, मैंने उसको कहा मैं देख लेता हूँ, फिर से देख लेता हूँ, फिर से उसको बोल देता हूँ। उसने एक ही प्रश्न मुझसे पूछा, आंखों में आंखें डालकर, सुबह के 11 बजे थे, कि सर आपकी बहन के साथ अगर ऐसा होता तो भी आप मुझे उसको यही जवाब देते? मुझे काटो तो खून नहीं। और वहां जो हिट होती है यथार्थ की चीजें, फिर मेरे अंदर कुछ हुआ। और फिर मैंने एक ऑर्डर निकाला एसएचओ के लिए कि 2:30 बजे इसका ट्रांसफर किया जाता है, टोल्ड द ऑफिस। और दूसरे का निकाला कि इसको आप नियुक्त करेंगे, हमेशा ये थी कि उसको बंद किया जाना है, जो कर देगा वी विल हैव टू। एंड हो गया, गाय वाज अरेस्टेड। वो अलग बात है कि बाद में 10 दिन बाद मेरा स्थानांतरण हुआ, लेकिन वो जो एक आपके जमीर को चीजें झकझोर जाती हैं। मैं राजस्थान से आता हूँ, भंवरी देवी का केस हुआ, मैं उसकी मेरिट डिमेरिट में नहीं जाता, सबने जाना। फिर वहां से एक आंदोलन छिड़ता है, और जो हम लोगों की जितनी गलत अवधारणाएं सामाजिक हैं वो उसमें सामने आती हैं, फिर वो टूटती हैं, फिर आमूल चूल परिवर्तन होता है, और फिर धीरे धीरे उसमें विशाखा गाइडलाइंस आती हैं, सुप्रीम कोर्ट के जजमेंट्स आते हैं, कई चीजें उसमें होती हैं। तो ये वो साहित्य है, मैं वो आप बीती चीज बता रहा हूं जो हमने पढ़ा। अब प्रमाणिक साहित्य आ रहा है सामने, प्रमाणिक मतलब भुगता हुआ, जो दलित राइटर्स अब लिख करके आ रहे हैं। अगर आप पढ़ेंगे ओम प्रकाश वाल्मीकि की झूठन, उनकी आत्मकथा के उसमें, और वो झूठन खा खा के जो समाज विकसित हुआ है। मैं बहुत कुछ देर पहले एक सेशन अटेंड कर रहा था, तो कल्पना सरोज जी, उनको पद्मश्री भी दिया गया है, और वो नारी भी हैं और दलित वर्ग से आती हैं, और कई सालों से जो कंपनियां नुकसान में चल रही थी, शी टेक्स ओवर दोज कंपनीज, वो बैठती हैं उस समझौता, और उसके बाद वो कंपनीज प्रॉफिट में आ जाती हैं। 2000 में उन्होंने कंपनी ली, 2007 तक वो करते हैं, फिर 2007 से 13 तक वो सारी कंपनीज को प्रॉफिट में ले आती हैं, जो कि कई बड़े बड़े दिग्गज नहीं ले आ पाए। और वहां से एक नई कहानी उपजती है, एक नया साहित्य उपजता है, और तब ये बात होती है कि साहब कैन वी बी द रिस्क बेयरर्स। और जब आप दलित नेताओं को सुनेंगे, अभी जो साहित्य आ रहा है दलित का, कैन यू बी द रिस्क बेयरर्स, हम जीवन यापन से उठ करके क्या हम किसी और को रोजगार देने की बात कर सकते हैं, क्या हम एंटरप्रेन्योर्स हो सकते हैं? एंड देन दे से कि साहब मुझे, हमें सिंपैथी नहीं चाहिए, हमें इक्वल अपॉर्चुनिटी चाहिए। और वहां से फिर नई कहानियां निकल के आती हैं। तो वही साहित्य, और जो भागीदारी का एक चल रहा है मुहिम, उसमें देन दे से कि अब साहित्य को भी अपना रुख बदलना होगा। जो साहित्य उस वक्त लिखा गया कि ये मजबूर था, इसने झूठन खा खा के बड़े हुए, इसकी अबला पे, अब कहते हैं कि साहब लोक साहित्य की जब बात करते हैं तो कहते हैं कि लोक प्रथम है। तो जो आदमी है उसकी संस्कृति, उसकी भाषा का मान करिए, और ये नहीं कि आप किसी तरह की भाषा या संस्कृति थोपिए, और उसकी संस्कृति को मान करते हुए उसको आगे आने का अवसर प्रदान करें, तब ये साहित्य। तो नया जो समाज आ रहा है, तो वो नया साहित्य आ रहा है, जो कि हमें धारणाओं को, हमारी जितनी भी शक्तियां हैं जो कि हमारी सोच को प्रभावित कर सकती हैं, ये उस दिशा में अग्रसर हो रहा है। तो ये जो साहित्य है, अब कहने को तो हम कुछ भी कह सकते हैं, बीच में अभी रिसेंटली, और ये सब साहित्य ने परिवर्तन लाए क्योंकि विचारधारा चली, और वो साहित्य ये था थर्ड जेंडर का। आप में से, हम में से कोई भी कहीं पैदा हो सकता था, मैं भी थर्ड जेंडर हो सकता था, इसमें मेरी कोई गलती नहीं होती, जो भी है। लेकिन समाज अब उसको मान्य कर रहा है। धीरे 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 हमने वो समाज भी देखा जो, जबकि वो एक उपहास के पात्र थे, तिरस्कृत किए जाते थे, अब वही नेशन, वही राष्ट्र, वो उसको एक थर्ड जेंडर का दर्जा दे रहा। उनकी नई कहानियां आ रही है, उनके भी लेखक हैं, और इसी इसी साहित्य अकेडमी के प्रांगण में हम जब उनकी कहानियां सुनते तब मालूम पड़ता है कि वो भी उतने ही मानवीय हैं, उनमें भी दर्द है, उनमें भी वो उड़ने की एक कल्पना है, एक शक्ति है। तो ये है साहित्य, जो कि हम दूसरे व्यक्ति के अस्तित्व को स्वीकार करते हैं और धीरे धीरे फिर उसमें सामाजिक न्याय की तरफ, जस्टिस की तरफ बढ़ते हैं, परिवर्तन लाने की कोशिश करते हैं। कहीं ना कहीं से वो कहानी आती है। अब समलैंगिकता को लेकर के भी बहुत विरोधाभास है, अभी भी हम लोग स्पष्ट नहीं। लेकिन जो व्यक्ति वो मानसिक रूप से, व्यवहारिक रूप से कितना उसमें अपने आप को मुश्किल पाता है, इट्स a huge psychological issue, behavioral issue. It's a huge issue of humanity. कई कंट्रीज ने माना है, कहीं ने नहीं माना है, कहीं में कोर्ट्स ने माना है, लेकिन ये अभी विषय है जिस पर समाज को आगे बढ़ना है, उनकी कहानियों को ऊपर आना है, उनके दर्द को हर एक व्यक्ति ने समझना है। हम किसी एक उस पे, तो ऐसे कई आमूलचूल परिवर्तन आए और धीरे धीरे, और साहित्य तो अब डिजिटल साहित्य, डिजिटल एक्सप्लॉयटेशन हो रहे हैं, अब नया साहित्य आ रहा है, एआई ड्रिवन साहित्य आएगा, ऑलरेडी इट इज देयर। अब जो डिजिटल लाइफ हो गई है, नेटिजन्स की लाइफ हो गई, और उसके आपको मालूम भी नहीं पड़ता है कि आप एक्सप्लॉइट हो रहे हैं, आप उसमें कोऑपरेट कर रहे हैं। इतनी कई कहानियां आती हैं। मैं हम लोग मैं आई वाज हेडिंग ब्यूरो ऑफ पुलिस रिसर्च एंड डेवलपमेंट, वहां पे हम लोगों ने एक रिसर्च करवाई थी इन्हीं पे। तो आप विलिंगली एक्सप्लॉइट होते हैं, बिकॉज आपको ये नहीं मालूम है कि उस तरफ लड़का है या लड़की है। वो वयस्क बालिका सोचती है कि ये कोई लेडी है जो मेरे को मदद करना चाह रही है। ऐसे कई केसेस होते हैं। तो अब लाइफ के फॉर्मेट्स चेंज हो रहे हैं, नई कहानियां वहां से उभर के आ रही है, तो फिर नया तरह का साहित्य आएगा, और फिर एआई की दुनिया में किस तरह के और एक्सप्लॉयटेशंस होंगे, किस तरह की बात होगी। तो चूंकि जीवन के स्वरूप बदल रहे हैं, तो नया नया साहित्य उसमें आता चला जाएगा। हमें सामाजिक न्याय की हम बात करते हैं, वहां तो अनोनिमिटी है। अब तो वहां पता भी नहीं है कि दूसरी तरफ जो है आपके, वो कौन है, किस जाति का है, क्या है, नहीं है। तो ऐसी बहुत सारी चीजें हैं। मैं अपने विचार मूलतः यहीं तक, एक विचारधारा, हो सकता है कि बाद में क्वेश्चन आंसर सेशन हो, उसमें और इंटरेक्ट करने का, और भी स्पीकर्स यहाँ हैं, और आई बिलीव दे आर मच नॉलेजेबल एंड एक्सपीरियंस देन मी, वो अपनी बात रखेंगे। तो मैं यहाँ पर केवल एक दोहा कबीर का, कि जो हम लोग या जितने भी लोग हैं जो अपने आप को समझते हैं कि हम बड़े हैं, जब हम ऐसा समझते हैं तभी हम दूसरे को छोटा समझेंगे। तो उस पे भी, एक तो कबीर ने जो कहा है, और वो भी हमारे जीवन उसको कंट्रोल करता है, सोच को, हमारी दिशा को, कि बड़ा हुआ तो क्या हुआ, जैसे पेड़ खजूर, पंछी को छा, बड़ी क्लास में, चौथी दूसरी क्लास में। लेकिन जब हमने तो चाइल्डहुड में, फर्स्ट चाइल्डहुड में पढ़ा, लेकिन अब सेकंड चाइल्डहुड में जबकि जीवन का बहुत अनुभव हो गया, तो लगता है कि कितनी गहरी बात कह गए, कि बड़ा हुआ तो क्या हुआ, जैसे पेड़ खजूर, और पंछी को छाया नहीं, फल लागे अति दूर। बात बहुत छोटी सी है, लेकिन बहुत गहरी है। क्योंकि मैं लखनऊ से आया हूँ, तो एक शेर पढ़े बिना मैं जाऊंगा नहीं, तो एक शेर आपकी नजर करता हूँ। जो कोई आपसे झुक के मिलता होगा, उसका कद आपसे क्या होगा। जय हिंद।
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद सर। बहुत ही सादे शब्दों में बहुत गहरी बात है, और आपकी शायरी और दोहे सुनकर एक शेर मुझे भी ध्यान में आ रहा है, आपकी इजाजत के साथ कहना चाहूंगी, जो शायद कहीं इस विषय को रख भी सकेगा। ये जब्र भी देखा है तारीख के अहदों का, ये जब्र भी देखा है तारीख के अहदों का, लम्हे ने खता की थी, सदियों ने सजा पाई। तो वो जो छोटा-सा एक पल होता है जिसमें कि कोई घटना घट जाती है और वो हमेशा एक सदियों के लिए मिसाल बनकर हमें टीसता रहता है, घाव बनकर, ज़ख्म बनकर। ये न्याय व्यवस्था उस तरफ देखती है और उसका इलाज करती है। मैं चाहूँगी कि इस पर कुछ बात करने के लिए मुकुल सर।
Respected Dipak Misra ji and the dignitaries of the dais, respected Chair of the Sahitya Academy, Secretary, and good afternoon to you all. When this theme was, given to me to speak on, the first thing that flashed in my mind that okay, let me reflect on my literature and find out how much of society is there in my literature. And this reflection took me into the larger context. That what is the relation in social justice and literature? And before talking about social justice, I would like to reflect, I would like to touch upon the relationship between literature and advocacy as such. That is what we are talking about here. And advocacy can be for various causes. And one of the causes can be social justice. Advocacy, when we talk about the relationship between literature and advocacy, I'm reminded of the famous playwright, German playwright, Bertolt Brecht, when he says that only a new purpose can lead to a new art. What it means to say that even when a writer is espousing a particular cause, ultimate objective of that writer is to give a new aesthetic turn, a new aesthetic color to his art. But he goes on to deliberate, he goes deeper and deeper into this issue, and ultimately comes out that, okay, aesthetic concern and the commitment in literature, they mutually enrich each other, and ultimately, by way of generative fraction, and ultimately, the literature, uh, as such literature is produced, which has got inherent commitment in it, inherent advocacy in it. So my talk today, I have classified my talk into two classes of literature. First is the literature that is not in the nature of literary activism as such. When we call literary activism, the tone and tenor of that literature is very different. It is very aggressive and bold, and ultimately it is specifically meant to serve that particular cause. But before that, let me come to the literature that doesn't have that overt consciousness, that is not produced with the overt consciousness of serving a particular cause. And here, I think, here literature emerges as a natural victor because I believe that literature is the conscience keeper of society. It has got a huge influence upon, huge ennobling influence upon man. Even when you are exploring some personal experiences, that those personal experiences have a universal appeal. It stirs the social conscience. It stirs the social conscience. It disturbs you, and ultimately it creates the brainstorming that that ultimately leads to the evolution of the human institutions based on reason. Because of course, what is human history? Human history is nothing but the increasing sphere of reason, and that is what we are trying to look at our traditions from the prism of reason. And that is how social institutions have been evolving. So literature is the mirror of society, of course. So your society naturally enters, into literature. And here and I will illustrate, with it another example that how literature is inherently, oriented to the evolution of human society. Sylvia Plath, you must have, knowing about Sylvia Plath. She was a very, famous poet. She was a very famous She was a very, famous poet who explored at length her adverse female experiences and her poetry, like her works. I will talk about Sylvia Plath in detail a little later, down my talk. But here is the example of how personal experiences have universal appeal, and hers, emerged to be one of the strongest feminist voices in the Western world. And the second example is the example of Charles Dickens. 19th century England. He has so boldly and aggressively. So Charles Dickens, of course, we must appreciate he was not a political or social activist. Still, he has explored in his novels the theme of social justice in a very bold and ample tone. His novel, how a touching depiction of that young boy in the Oliver Twist goes on to recreate the 19th century, the picture of 19th century England. Poverty, hunger, that working conditions in the workhouses, and inequality in society at large. Dickens' novel, reverberate with social overtones without any overt consciousness. He was not an activist. We can't say that he was a proponent of literary activism. And literary activism is a modern phenomena, I believe. Initially, when something touches you, something touches an artist, something touches the writer, and he explores that particular theme, ultimately it goes on to serve the cause of the social themes. So I have classified my talks into like two theaters. First is Western, and second is Indian. In the Western context, I have taken up the theme of feminism, like how literature influenced feminism in the Western world. So let me begin with suffragette poetry. So it is where I'm talking about how poetry influenced, the cause of feminism in the Western world. And suffragette poetry, it emerged during late 19th century, and it was the movement for the right to vote for women, and it emerged in Britain. And the pioneer, poet, the pioneer voice, I can say, was Emily Frankel. She was a poet, and her two daughters, Sylvia and Christabel. They emerged as the strong poetic voices, and they talked about the empowerment of women. Right to vote for women was, of course, the immediate issue. The largest perspective, they explored their female experiences, and ultimately that their literature came on to reflect that. And her tone is absolutely militant and confrontational. Emily Frankel. And she was a political activist and a poet as well. So she is a very representative example when it comes to talking about the relationship, establishing the relationship between, social justice and literature. And then came this Harlem Renaissance, early 20th century in the United States, witnessed the rise of feminist voices, and it was amidst the flourishing African American culture. And here in this Renaissance, the issue of racial discrimination and issue of gender got affected. And the poets like Zora Neale Hurston, Langston Hughes, and Claude McKay, they explored that autonomy and agency for women in such a strong poetic voices. And it was they explored the experiences of black queer women. So here, beautifully, feminism gets blended with the issue of black identity, that racial discrimination. Then Audre Lorde, of course, a prominent African American lesbian poet, through her poetry collections, The Black Unicorn and Sister Outsider, was so instrumental in challenging societal norms and advocating intersectional feminism through the explorations of black and queer women. And then, of course, talking about Sylvia Plath. I'm back to Sylvia Plath because I consider her to be a very illustrative example of how literature unconsciously relates to the social issues. And she was a confessional poet, and she has explored her adverse relationship with her father, her personal female experiences, and she has reflected upon the mental illness that is born of adverse female experiences. I would like to just recite a couple of lines for her from her poem. Ariel, as I told you, Ariel and the Bell Jar were the very flagship works of Sylvia Plath. Let me quote a few lines from her poem. This poem is titled Lady Lazarus. Out of ash, out of ash, I rise with my red hair as I eat man like hair. So you can see, it is reverberant with the feminist, overtones. And her flagship poem again, The Daddy, where she says, if I have killed man, I have killed two. If I have killed a man, I have killed two. The vampire who said he was you and drank my blood for a year, 7 years. If you want to know, Daddy, you can lie back now. So see, like she explored her personal experiences, and ultimately they served the cause of feminism. And her poetry was, utilized in a big way to prop up the feminist movement in the Western world. And of course, the most popular Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou's poems are titled "Still I Rise," and the cage bird still sings. The very title is explanatory, where she talks of self-discovery and resilience for women in the Western society then. And of course, she is black also. But she is a civil rights activist and a literature. So these are the examples, perfect examples to reflect on this theme. And many diverse poetic voices came together uh, in the Western world to. Now let me come to straight away because the time constraint is there. So I have already been given, uh, warning that okay, I have to be very brief. So let me come back to India. Okay, that was the Western world, and let me come back to India. India, where I have chosen the theater of Indian national movement first. Past, it is a historical. I think the greatest historical saga ever told and ever happened. And here, again, our beloved Mahatma Gandhi, I am reminded of the way he blended the way he blended the social themes into this political movement. The way that social consciousness, perfect example of the merger of social consciousness and political consciousness. Anti-colonial consciousness and nationalism ultimately was our prime objective to dismantle the British regime. But the way he blended the issues of untouchability and freedom for women. Untouchability was a cost, was a cause dearest to his heart. And through his journal, Harijan, again the example of how literature spreads the social consciousness through his journal, Harijan, and the Gujarati journal, I think he played an absolutely crucial role. Navjeevan also, yes, of course, Navjeevan. Young India was, earlier, it was his first journal, and so later on. So Harijan and Navjeevan, and he founded Harijan also to espouse that cause. But let me straight away switch to the contemporary time. And when I contemporary times, what I feel that literary activism, the finest proponent of literary activism is Arundhati Roy. She is the perfect example of how an artist ultimately, takes up literature in order to serve a particular social cause. And her tone is bold, aggressive, and absolutely unmistaken. In her work, like Sir was talking about transgender, in her work, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, she has revealed in such bold terms that how the people with complex identity are relegated to the social margins, how to face discrimination. Her writings is not only the sensitive exploration, it is a loud call for change and social justice. And another work like The God of Small Things, the most popular work of Arundhati Roy, where she explores untouchability, the love story of Velutha and Amma. And ultimately, not only they face the hardship, but ultimately that novel conveys the resilience and the power of the people who face discrimination in society to ultimately survive. So they live their love. They live their love in the face of fiercest of hardship. So that is where literature, and ultimately when she writes, what does it do? It fosters the social consciousness, it fosters the human value, and as I told you, literature has an inherent ennobling influence on man. Then in walking with the comrades, she shares her first-hand experience of living with the gorilla fighters in the forest. And then she came out with that because she tried to establish the root cause of the Maoist, insurgency, like issue of land rights, issue of inequality, issue of displacement. All such issues have been, dealt in a very sensitive manner that somehow is bound to touch human hearts. So that is how like I want to go on and on, but time is limited. So just I would conclude by this talk of Salman Rushdie, who says, "I go to literature because that is where I find the lowest and the highest places of human society. And when he says that, I think you have to decipher this statement in the larger context. When he says highest places, those highest places become the role model, and the lowest for the lowest places. So you also explore, you also illuminate the highest places that ultimately become the role model for the lowest places. That is what literature is doing. So, like this is the oceanic subject. I have chosen only two. I have only chosen two themes and two theaters. So, thank you very much. Thank
Thank you so much. I believe there are two things. One is literature based on the social justice, and the other is social justice emerged out of the created literature. So this is like that, I believe. And it is, you must, I had read somewhere in my childhood days, I believe, you must raise your voice at the right time, else you may have to accept if you never wanted to. So this is actually the literature gives you the courage to raise your voice. Sir, I would like Ashwini Kumar sir, please come.
सबसे पहले अपने अग्रज और एमिनेंट poet and writer Madhav Kaushik ji ko bahut bahut namaskar for inviting me to this very prestigious panel. And Rao Sahib has always been kind and generous to me. I work, so thank you, Rao Sahib, for inviting me. And I'm really blessed today, eminent jurist, lordship, and is still with us. I continue to be, sir. I was sharing, conversation, a small conversation about being a student of justice and also, a teacher of justice that I have been teaching for decades. Justice is an area of scholarly and philosophical investigation. And I also thank Supreme Court for giving my institute, Institute of Social Sciences, the unique program in terms of pedagogy, teaching, justice. So this is where I begin with you, and a sort of thought experiment, a kind of counterfactual analysis of the relationship between literature and social justice, which is tensile, nebulous, and also, eternal tension between literature and social justice. So that relationship and that complexities, I would speak briefly. And before I get into that, there are three philosophers of justice who have fascinated my understanding of justice. I'm kind of, my last book was about extending neo-Kantian justice and reflecting on God's law, and the works that have come out, my own poems revolving around Gaza and Ukraine. I remember Kant, the rights violated one part of the world shall be heard in all parts of the world. So that's the relationship literature has. And so that counterfactual, experiment that I'm sharing with, is there any literature without justice or social justice? We're gonna go back and look at, the epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata. And if I'm allowed to use some of the Kantian insights to explore that tensile, tenuous, nebulous relationship between literature and justice, social justice, I will come back later. That's a very Rawlsian idea because originally, if you look at the whole, you know, universe of the literature is kind of animated, and also, kind of populated with the idea of justice. So Mahabharata, if you look at, was fought on the inequalities and injustices arising out of the land, or various inequalities, unfairness, and collapse of the moral order. So if you trace that, the longest epic journey of the idea of justice alone, minus social, and come to Fakir Mohan Senapati's iconic Odia novel, The 6 Acres and a Half. If you look at that, the first Odia novel, And you can see the relationship between, the epic idea, the mimetic idea of justice, the mythopoetic idea of justice, incubating, literature and, justice together. And here you come to the rise of the novel. So if you look at, the social landscape and the political landscape of the rise of novel as a genre, you will find justice at the center of it. So that's what I'm trying to suggest, that in this sense, this is kind of eternal, flow of the river, So no text, literary text, poetic, the word poetic justice is often used in a philosophical context, and also in the jurisprudential context. And that refers to our mythopoetic memory of our construction, both as an individual and civilization, in terms of the justice. I'm again, remembering a conversation with my teacher, Michael Sandel at Harvard, who was here at, Jaipur Lit Festival. And on the lighter note, when I met my colleague, former colleague, and my mentor and teacher, I asked him that, "How are you doing?" He said that I'm doing fine, Ashwani, because I'm teaching a lot of justice, also political justice. And what are you doing? I said that I moved away from justice to literature. They said that, "Oh, I heard that you have become a poet, perhaps a significant poet." He said, "Perhaps." I didn't know what he meant by perhaps, because that's the relationship. But he said that you have not defected, not deviated from justice, because literature is also justice. And this is where I'm happy that already Maheshwari has spoken about various streams of, in an empirical and experiential and phenomenological sense about streams of justice that influence contemporary Indian literature. So back to what in a kind of conversation between two giants of justice, Michael Walzer, spheres of justice. Spheres of justice is about domination, resisting the dominance. Whether a poet, whether a fiction writer, a non-fiction writer, wherever you find this opposition to the domination, that's where the literature flourishes. So that's where you can see in, I read Madhavai's new poem translated into English, In the Fight He Gave Me. I went through, Return Arjuna. And this Return Arjuna was a reminder of this mythopoetic and historical journey of the justice in the larger context, where the protagonist is looking at this idea of justice. And now, because I found it intriguing, enchanting topic of the panel, social justice. So if you look at political, economic, in a non-Kantian sense, or perhaps non-Walgerian sense of a sphere of justice, because it was our great master Rawls publishing in 1970, who popularized this idea of social justice around the world. If you look at the journey of literature, especially since 70, around the world, Rawls has been at the center of literary and political imagination. Whether it's a feminist text, whether it's a black text, or whether it's Dalit text, tribal text, Adivasi text, or indigenous text, all around the world, they deal with the questions, eternal questions that were also raised. What is the social justice? How do we ensure social justice? And this is where we find a clash, a tensile clash between the idea of liberty and who knows this better than the Lordship himself, who has dealt several pioneering judgments about maintaining the fine balance between justice and autonomy of the individual and autonomy of the what we're missing here from my point of view, as someone who deals with justice, both theoretical and conceptual, not just in my poetic landscape, but this idea of relationship with liberty, the liberty of the writer to say anything, to say all kinds of regimes, all kinds of domination, and give voice to voice who are underrepresented. So this is where whenever I read, Wretched of the Earth, that's the, almost Bible of the third world revolutionary. That's, written largely non-fiction, but became, a sort of the revolutionary literary text for anyone fighting for the liberation of Africa, Latin America, and Asia against the excesses of imperialism. So in that sense, if you look at, the whole realm of justice, particularly social justice, is not just about, distribution of, social goodies and services, but it's much larger idea that social justice today has become, That's why I'm trying to speak through three great contemporary thinkers and philosophers, Kant, Voltaire, and Sandel, who speaks of humanitarian justice, ensuring how literature can be a very, very powerful instrument of, connecting us to the goal of ensuring social justice for the marginalized, dominated, all parts of the world, not just India alone, I'm based in Mumbai, and the landscape where I come from, my friends are here from Gujarati literature, Marathi literature. And if you look at, the realism, I started out with Uriya realism, especially with novel tradition. The beginning can be traced to social justice, which is also, as I referred to earlier, mythopoetic journey, in a sense of civilizational journey, Back to, recently I was in Kashmir when trying to look at landscape, aesthetic and poetic landscape. And I was not surprised that Lal Ded is much significant, voice in terms of the relationship between literature and social justice. He went around, like often naked also, just to fight against the social taboos, inequalities, and also about patriarchy, So, recently I also had a take on, you know, uh, the major, like Kannadas and also the southern, literature. If you look at entire Sangam, the Sangam literature also originates from, of late, my Dalit friends and writers informed that originated from Dalit, uprising, in terms of the consciousness of putting, into the realm of literature. So that's where we come from. And Mahadevi Akka, Mahadevi Akka gave voice to people who lack the voice, although it is reductionist when we use the term, feminist particularly. But if you look at, Kantian idea, justice for all, it seems that, there seems to be, flow of justice, and especially social justice. And it's extending, I will, stop here because, and I would like, Lordship to speak more on that. But I stop here that in terms of, Lordship, our own jurisprudential, improvement and modification, the social justice has moved away from, anthropocentric world of justice to post-anthropocentric world of justice. So now we are speaking about animals' rights, my colleagues working in new utilitarian areas of justice, they inform us the rights of animals, rights of flora, faunas, and finally, the social justice rights of the planet itself. So thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you so much, short and crisp. So it is like justice has to be there, be it poetic, political, social, but justice has to take place. हमें लगना चाहिए कि मलाल नहीं है, हमारे साथ कुछ गलत हुआ। ऐसा नहीं लगना चाहिए कि हमें पता नहीं है तो हमें कोई बेवकूफ बना देगा। तो वो किस तरीके से वो चीजें आए समाज में कि हर व्यक्ति अपने आप को सुरक्षित और ऐसा महसूस करे कि उसके साथ जस्टिस हुआ है, न्याय हुआ है। मेरे ख्याल बिना एक भी मिनट गवाए आप हमारे आज के सत्र को पूरा कर रहे हैं, उनसे उनकी बात सुनेंगे। हम सभी स्वागत करते हैं।
Mr. Maheshwari, Mr. Kumar, Mr. Mukul, Kashyap Sahab, Mr. Srinivas Rao, ladies and gentlemen, I have been given 20 minutes. If I go first, I'll take 20 minutes. If I go slow, I'll take 20 minutes. So I would request you to have what they call the relaxation of spirit. Don't take stress to listen to me, but do listen to me. Right? It's an agreement, and I would request whoever has got in should not leave. That disturbs the speaker. If anybody wants to go, he may leave. You see, I wanted to structure my speech in Coleridgean style. That is to say, best words in best order. Pause. I'm no one to judge myself that I am writing the best. You are the judges, but I must put 100% according to my ability and understanding. I have always felt that when it's required to speak on a topic like the present one, literature and social justice, it's appropriate to understand the denotative determination, mark my words, denotative determination and the connotative expansion of the words used therein. In the present context, there is a word which is not used, but has the distinct connect and influence over the stated terms. The word is law. How can you connect social justice with literature in the absence of law? Father has to have a grandfather, right? Literature and law are very deeply connected. I think it appropriate to acquaint you with two statements of law. Very simple. I'm not making it complex at all. Just pay attention to this definition by this is by Lyndon S. Johnson. He says, law is the great civilizing machinery. It liberates the desire to build and subdues the desire to destroy. And if war can tear us apart, law can unite us out of fear or love or reason or all three. Law is the greatest human invention. All the rest give him mastery over the world. Law gives him mastery over himself. Storm says law is neither formal logic nor the embodiment of inexorable scientific laws. It's a human institution created by human agents to serve human ends. It's meant for us, you, me. It's an accepted norm that law does not tolerate anarchy. It protects life, liberty, individuality, and identity as recognized by the supreme law of this country, that is the organic constitution. It acts through constitutional consent. Reverence for law is requisite in an orderly society. Sometimes there is a feeling to achieve the said purpose, law should be fully stable. I would like to choose to agree with Roscoe Pound, who says law must be stable and yet cannot stand still. You must understand this sentence. Be stable, but don't suffer from stillness. Interpretation of organic law, that's constitution, has to be progressive and reflect a vision for the present. It is the duty of the courts on whom the duty is caste, and also the legislature which make the law. I'm mobilized to state here that literature mentions the word law on many an occasion. Someone has sent me a book. He said Shakespeare mentions 276 times law. I'm not written here. Mere mentioning does not have impact on the aspect of social justice. The situations, the descriptive passages, characters, orientations, dialogues, felt passions, poetical feelings, rhythms, and rhymes, and such facets contribute to the fundamental etymology of social science. It can be stated with certitude that the literature has delightful, dignified, and impactful relationship with social justice. It needs to be noted that as literature has many compartments, similarly, the concept of social justice encompasses number of aspects such as equality, empathy, mutual respect, inclusiveness, value of humanism, and human rights. I must tell you here, it's my duty. I'm not following any chronology. You know why? I personally feel as a student of literature, literature should not have any kind of boundary of chronology. I can speak about 21st century poem. I can go to the ancients. Who are you to control? You mean anyone? Let me first travel in the time machine to Emerson. He was not a poet that way or a right novelist. He says, please remember this. It's very interesting. He says about ancients, all my best thoughts were stolen by the ancients. Uh, There are some young minds, I would like to explain this for. Whenever I think I'm a great, I'm modern, then when I go deep, I find, yes, this somebody has in the past 2000 years back has spoken that idea in a different way. They have stolen mine. Not that I am thinking like that. Look at the saying, look at the statement. Now, we'll come to social justice. Let me go to the Greeks. The play Prometheus Bound by Aeschylus is quite revealing. But the playwright poses, this was one of the speakers who really gave emphasis, poses questions and makes the audience think slightly differently regarding had to the time when it was written. The dramatist may not be able to avoid the inevitable. He's not a modern man, but by posing questions, he desires the readers to be empathetic. If you are thinking of social justice today, you can't abandon empathy and drive on the futile march of social justice. That is why Aeschylus was putting questions. In Prometheus Unbound, the great romantic poet Shelley elevates the status of Prometheus, who had suffered for the benefit of humanity and raised the issue of justice by making the punished, the Prometheus, free. This redemption makes the reader feel that empathy for human causes requires different treatment. It also lays down that courage is the greatest virtue in a man and capacity to suffer, not Christ-like suffer, but suffer, are absolutely essential to sustain the hunger to fight for social justice and keeping in mind Hemingway's words. A man can be destroyed, but not defeated. That is what exactly Mr. Kumar and Mr. Mukul and Maheshwari were trying to speak in a different way. I may be enlarging or precise, I know not. These words of Hemingway, I would like to convey, I feel they speak of transcendence of human spirit. While saying, I may caution that any struggle for social justice, neurological, numerical, pathological, or any logical, social justice or interest must have our constitutional acceptability and be in consonance with the principle of constitutional morality. There are many instances where literature has acted as an influencing factor in transformation of social norms that in the ultimate eventuality ushers in humanitarian social justice. It's because it has the effect potentiality to make one travel in the realm of utopia. I hope you know utopia. Or transport one to watch morbidity at large. It mirrors the social spectrum and warrants people to think, change, and elevate. At this juncture, I may refer to the Nobel laureate John Galsworth's play Justice. Sir Winston Churchill, while functioning as the Home Secretary, had seen the play and was greatly influenced. He had played a great role in prison reforms and rehabilitation. Addressing the House of Commons, he had spoken, I quote, we cannot impose the serious penalties of an individual unless we make a great effort, a new effort to rehabilitate and who have been in prison and secured their having a chance to resume their places in the ranks of honorable industry. The present system is not satisfactory. With the passage of time, there were prison reforms in England, and presently it is regarded as an inseparable aspect of human rights. Can there be anything more than this which will be coming to the compartment of social justice? It only came from a play. While talking about prisons, it's extremely difficult for a sensitive student of literature not to recollect the anguished and suffering voice of great English writer Oscar Wilde in The Ballad of Reading Tower. He says, he writes with pain, I know not whether laws be right, but whether laws be wrong. All that we know who lie in Gaur is that the wall is strong and that each day is like a year and a year whose days are long. These agonized experiences created a stir in the society. And individual thinkers as well as concerned organizations raised the issue of proportionality of sentence and purpose of solitary confinement. Needless to emphasize, it comes within the ambit of social justice, for law and punishment concerns every social being, and that is why they have been reproduced by Justice Krishna Iyer in his judgment while he was dealing with Section 433 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. That's a facet of social justice. Social justice expects that societies would foster such values so that there would be a harmonious coexistence in spite of having growth of adequate individual prospects in relation to thought, expressions, and ideals. Human characters are required to be built so that each one, as a member of the collective, should respect each other. This can spring from the fact that if everyone realizes that on many an occasion, anger, can anyone raise hand who has never got angry? Even I can't. Becomes a destructive factor which ultimately dents peace and affects the marrow of normalcy. Literature warns about the resultant fact of anger and its causes. John Steinbeck, the Nobel Prize winner, in his moving work, The Grapes of Wrath, says the line between hunger and anger is a thin line. You can experiment on yourselves. I'm talking to the young people. Just remain hungry, then you eat after some time, you will realize there has been a sublimation of emotion and your anger is gone. Self experimentation is the best experiment. In India, ancient storyteller Vishnu Sharma had said, Bubuk chita king nakaroti papam, khina jana niskaruna bhavanti. Maybe a small story, but has a impact everywhere. Both the statements in different ages convey a warning to the collective. The only difference is that the older one is didactic, teaching type, and the 20th century one is full of agony and in a way terrifying. But the social concern, the societal involvement should be to see and scan that people have the primary necessities and justice in the collective sense serves the civilized sensitivity. Whoever understands the dignified connection between literature and social justice, it's it intellectually exciting relationship. And this moving motivation brings in the concept of dignity that constitutes a significant characteristic of social justice. Many social thinkers and philosophers, here we met, like Kant and Locke, emphasize on the person's individual identity and dignity. In the ancient epic Mahabharata, Karna emerges as a larger than life who believes in Purushartha and fights for his honor and dignity till his death. Shakespeare treats King Lear, a man troubled within, as a dignified protagonist. He mourns, he's sad, but he doesn't, he does it. His sadness, his sorrow, his mourning is like that of a king because he feels within, I am King Lear. In this context, one cannot forget Ibsen's powerful play, A Doll's House, where in direct social terms, he makes the wife Nora to speak about her own relevance, individuality, and identity. It is so carefully crafted that it does not convey the fight for ego as a psychological facet. It's a fight for social status, the essence of existence. Such other writings have made lawmakers and constitutional courts to confer equal status on women, ostracizing the patriarchal theory and abandoning condescending attitude. Why should you order your wife or daughter, go and get me a glass of water if the water glass is there? Impermissible. Don't do it. I must add here that progressive interpretation of constitutional rights has responded to the paradigm shift in the social justice spectrum. I think it apt in the present context to refer to one of the vibrant sayings of Tagore, who speaks of individual freedom in a different way. I quote, "Man goes into the noisy crowd to drown his own clamor of silence. He is not giving his individuality, he is elevating it." You must understand it. The poet seems to say, it is the freedom, here is the dignity. This makes the recognition of social justice a beautiful aspect of humanity in literature. Environment, uh, it's a part of social justice, no. It's a human right, it's a right to life. One, you see, now it is called environmental ethicality is expected from everyone. One has to sit in a time machine and move to be in the company of Wordsworth, whose acceptance of the principle to surrender to beauty of nature and having love, passion, and respect. He had accentuated on purity of nature as if he had anticipated the attitude of man to play with nature in 20th century and now. I may note here that in certain writings of D.H. Lawrence, his love and care for environment is reflectable. The ancient poet Kalidas has given immense emphasis on nature, concerns, and the concept of environmental consciousness. That you will notice in Kumar Sambhav, where he says about Parvati, Shailadi Rajatanaya Na Jajavu Antastav. He brings a universalism in his image because, like a river flows towards the sea and gets obstructed by a big stone or a small hill, it recoils. Similarly, Parvati was in such a dilemma, she almost recoiled after seeing Shiva. Shailajirajatanaya na jajau na tastav. It is sometimes compared by people with Hamilton to be or not to be. That is the question. But that's in a different way. I've quoted few. Social justice is based on social equality. Now, I'll give you an example. When America was suffering from slave trade and the nature and the torture to slaves, Abraham Lincoln in the year 1863 issued the Emancipation Declaration. It's worth mentioning that the Emancipation Declaration was issued by the president to change the perception of Europeans who were thinking about the war between the North and South in a different light. Lincoln was of the view that European attitude would change by such a declaration, since more than 1 million people in Europe had read Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. It's very, very moving book. I don't know how many of you have read. It clearly shows the effect of literature on society, and more so when people conceive of freedom in society. Mr. Ashwini Kumar had talked about marginalization in a different way. Remember, marginalization and discrimination of the on the foundation of caste is basically a social disease. Authors in many structure or form bring in the inherent inequality and repulsive phenomenon in the system. The social stigma everywhere requires to be removed by the society, and this purpose is served by literature transforming people and by law, by literature transformation and by law imposition of punishment. It's necessary. Literature teaches the one attitude to have reflect the potentiality of freedom, freeing himself from the traditional chains. When one is free from the mental bondage, he is able to destroy the corrosive cells of the system, stop the humanity, and change the idea. That is what writers like Mukraj Anand and Martin Luther King Jr. proclaim, and that is what the courts have pronounced. Literature, with its laser beam, encompasses and spreads in many a manner and style, incorporating the necessity of inclusiveness, elevation, and being sensitive to dignity and spiritual oneness, abandoning all kinds of separating discriminatory feelings and attitudes. In this context, one recalls the most profound lines Lincoln has said. You see, Lincoln has declared the bill, the Emancipation Declaration, but he has to sought the support of the Congress. He spoke two lines. He says, "We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of art." If one doesn't accept it as poetry, then it is nobility of prose. Similarly, Lincoln, at the Gettysburg speech, which he never lived to witness, what's the impact? He says, and I'm deliberately quoting not the whole speech, 5, 6 lines. 4 score and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. This touches every student of literature and every person who believes in equality and not just the ideal of personal esteem as a significant aspect of social justice. Let me travel to kids for a minute. Kids' description of the miserable condition of Isabella is reflective of kind of socialism. Some call it Kitsian social empathy. In that last few decades, the progressive legislations would be pleasing kids in heaven. Progress, discovery, and invention in the modern world changes the view of literature and the perspective of social existence, which, as said earlier, has inseparable nexus. A modern poet writes, I am reading it, reading slowly so that you will be able to hear. Many say a concept or idea often mentioned lose their vitality. Others proclaim, despite clarity, repetition brings delight. Complex sweetness and memorable sadness in all possibilities are scared of commonality, loving aspirational sense of justice. Here the right poet is trying to say, you are only aspiring, not really fighting for the reality. The modern world demands social justice, cries for sensitive purpose, and requires literature to respond with empathy. And I must say, ladies and gentlemen, with all the humility, there is success. There is success today. And for that, Indian Sahitya Academy deserves to be congratulated, and I congratulate them. Have I taken more than 18 minutes? Someone says yes. If so, so be it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
थैंक यू सो मच सर। ये मुझे लगता है कि एक बहुत ही ऐतिहासिक क्षण होगा कि जो हमने आपको इतनी देर तक सुना, आपके एक्सपीरियंसेस से जो आपने ज़िंदगी को समझा, उसको समझने का, उसको देखने का एक एंगल हम लोगों को भी मिला। और जो कुछ आज सुना है, उसके बाद बोलने को कुछ नहीं रह जाता, सिर्फ़ अपने भीतर-भीतर उसी को दोबारा सुनना, उसकी एक अनुगूंज जैसे महसूस होती रहेगी। और तभी ये जो नया एज़ our secretary just he said he's trying to add some new topics to the function. ये एक्सपेरिमेंट जो है वो कितना कामयाब रहा ये इसी पे डिपेंड करेगा कि हमारे मन में ये चीज़ें सोचते रहें। थैंक यू सो मच सर एंड द पैनल टू। थैंक यू सो मच। We'll have a short break of 15 minutes, चाय पी करके फिर वापस यहाँ आते हैं और उसके बाद एक हाँ एक क्लोज फोटो।